Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think Rabbi Jay's not here this week, so I'm going to run the meeting. I'm assuming he'd announced there's lots and lots of classes this week. That's probably why he's so busy. So today we start the week, and we're actually going to continue last week's share. I have a little analogy I want to share with you in the beginning of the share, but let me give my introduction, and then I'll share with you a new analogy and tell me if you can. You'll share with me whether you think it works. Put my share my screen, and here we are. We need today's share. Okay. Today is class 16, I think.
15.
Class 16. Okay, let's go back up. Okay. Today's from Vayikra Sinai to Sanctuary to Society. You can see why I'm repeating the title in a minute. And I want to focus on the concept of covenant that we began talking about last week, and I'll explain why. Just a quick introduction, how this relates to our title. Sinai was the covenant, which we've been talking about the last 2 weeks. The reason I picked Parshat Bahar B'chukotai for the last 2 weeks is because we're doing Yitro Mishpatim. So I try to match it with Parshat Shuvah a little bit. And we explain how the Mishkan, which is the first half of Sefer Vayikra, when you visit the Mishkan, it's supposed to remind you not only of what happened at Har Sinai, but the commitment you made at Har Sinai to be a nation representing God. But that commitment affects how you behave in your society, which is the second half of Sefer Vayikra, which primarily focuses on how we do behave, how we don't behave, and how we represent God by how we behave in that society. Now, it would be interesting if the book ends returning to the concept of covenant, which takes us right back to Sinai. So it's almost going to be almost a chiasm, which we want to prove probably not next week because next week's the Yom Yun, but we can have another shir. I want to show you how there's not only a chiasm within Sefer Vayikra with Kedoshim 2 in the middle, but there'll be a chiasm between Har Sinai and Parshat Bahar Sinai. You can see how the books come together. But that'll take another couple of weeks. Okay, so that was my little introduction. So we're going to continue our study of Parshat Bahar this week. We were halfway through it last week, but I want to focus on the theme of covenant. And I did a little search on Al Torah, which I'll share with you real fast. The word Brit in Sefer Vayikra is 10 times. Okay, once in regarding salt on korbanot, which will be interesting. Once in regard to Shabbat, which makes sense. We'll see. And 8 times in the Tochacha, all in chapter 26. So if the word Brit is only 10 times in Vayikra, and basically it's not there that often, but there quite a lot in the Tochacha, that means the Tochacha in chapter 26, which is closing up the book, is taking us back to the theme of Brit and Har Sinai, and we'll see, as we began to see last week, all those topics relate also to the Ten Commandments. We saw the theme of the Ten Commandments being repeated in Parsha Bahar B'chukta as well, and hence titling that the whole unit with Har Sinai. Okay, so first let me stop the share for a second and just show you the Ala Torah. Where are we? Not here. You want. Here we go. Targum not done here. If I did a search with the word Brit in Chumash, again, Brit can be a covenant between anybody. So there's a Brit between Ava and Avimelech and things like that. So but the word's 27 times in Bereshit and 13 in Shemot, only 10 in Vayikra. But in Vayikra, it's always referring to the Brit between God and his people. Most of them in Shemot as well. Dvarim will be, which talks a lot about the Ten Commandments, also has the word Brit a lot. But we're going to focus on the 10 times in Sefer Vayikra, which, if I look at the list of them, so it's listed by number. So starting from number 40 will be the ones in Vayikra. So on my source sheet, let me stop the share now and go back to our source sheet, and now we'll get to work. The first one is in regards to every sacrifice that you bring needs salt. Okay, and there's a pasuk in chapter 2, after finishing the laws of Korban Mincha, it mentions in relation to Mincha that every Korban needs melach, not only the flour korbanot, all the sacrifices need melach, need salt, and it's called melach brit Elohecha, the salt of the covenant with God, and therefore every Korban needs salt. Now, someone who hasn't seen the Parshanim on this, suggest a reason why salt, what salt has to do with covenant. There's like
So
a wide
salt,
range of reasons.
salt
Yeah.
preserves.
Okay. Salt preserves something and it makes it eternal. And remember all the Britot we saw last week were Brit Olam, were eternal covenants. Remember the rainbow covenant was eternal, Brit Olam, circumcision covenant, Har Sinai covenant, Shabbat, the Od Brit. I mean, all the Britot were eternal covenants, which is one of the big themes. There's an eternal relationship between God and the people. So because melach is used to make something permanent, also good. Any other reason people heard of? Yeah. There's a Ramban who goes into physics here about physics about salt. Rashi sort of quotes it also, melach from the time of creation, but how water and something in sun somehow how it makes salt. There's something it's a really complicated Ramban, and Ibn Ezra goes a bit in that direction as well. But I think the best thing is it reflects something being eternal and it's the idea of a Brit Olam. If you want to see a nice pasuk in Divrei Yamim chapter 13, actually I have it on the source sheet. I mean on the if I go back to the if I go back to here, it should be in Divrei Yamim all the way at the end when there's a war um, between Yerovam and Avia in chapter 13 in Divrei Yamim Aleph. Where are we? Oh, wait till we end. I'm sorry here. All the way in Divrei Yamim. There's a lot of britot here. Let's go all the way to Divrei Yamim. It's Eov. Oh my gosh. There's a lot there. Divrei Yamim. Divrei Yamim Aleph. Chapter 13. Pictures over. Divrei Yamim has way more than I thought even. This was probably the best one. I'm sorry, Divrei Yamim Bet. That's why I got my mistaken. Bet Pas Perikut Gimel. Here we go. It says as follows. There's a speech between the two sides, and Aviyah stands on Har Tzmarim and tells the people of up north, "Halo lechem ladat ki Hashem Elohi Yisrael natan mamlecha leDavid al Yisrael lo'olam, lo levanat brit melach." You should know that the kingdom was given to David, and therefore your breakaway kingdom up north, you're not legitimate. We're legitimate because the covenant God made with David was called a brit melach. So when we're emphasizing the idea of a covenant being eternal, not something you can break, it's called a brit melach. We have the same thing in Sefer in chapter 18 in Sefer Bamidbar that the brit with between God and that's not that one. We need all the way up. God and between Hashem and the Kohanim. There's also a brit melach. Real quick, that should be Bamidbar chapter 18. Here we go. This one. This is in the laws of. Where are we? Oh, it's not loading. I guess you have to take my word. There it is. We want this way. We want this way. Chapter 18. Here. Actually, I should do it here in English Hebrew. Here. All the trumot of Kodashim, which Bnei Yisrael give to God, I'm giving to you and your children, etc. For a chok olam, a brit melach olamim lifnei Hashem. See the word olam and brit and melach always go together? It's the eternal covenant between God and the Kohanim and God and his people. So the idea of melach, the idea of eternity, so that gives, what I'm trying to show you is that if the Mikdash is our reminder of our covenant, and every single sacrifice which brings us closer to God or reminds us of our closeness to God and our connection to God requires melach, that melach on all the korbanot fits beautifully to the theme that the temple is about covenant. The temple is reminding of the covenant at Sinai. Okay, now, the second time we have it in Shemot is interesting, and it's something which I'll ask you just for a minute. Everyone knows that there's what's called avodat tamid. So on the menorah, we light shemen tamid. We light the candle in the morning and the evening. and we have the korban tamid on the outside mizbeach, the tefes chat taseva boker, and we have the k'torah tamid, and we have the lechem apanim tamid. Now, where are all those laws recorded? Where do we have the laws of the daily korban tamid? Anyone remember the daily korban tamid that which can correspond to that we daven shachrit and mincha every day?
Pinchas.
Anyone remember?
Pinchas.
Oh, so we repeat it in Pinchas. That's right, with the holidays, with the calendar. But the first time we have it is in Parshat Tetzaveh, after the 7 days of Miluim. Then it says after the 7 days of Miluim, in the end of chapter 29, on the Mizbeach you bring a korban tamid. Where do we have lighting the menorah tamid every day? Earlier in Parshat Tetzaveh, remember? Batat tzaveh b'nei Yisrael b'chol Hashem et zayit zak la'adlot ner tamid. Where do we have the K'toret tamid with the menorah? Also in Parshat Tetzaveh, the very end of Parshat Tetzaveh, the beginning of chapter 30. What I'm trying to show you is that all the avodot tamid are all recorded in Shemot. For some reason, the lechem apanim, what to do with it? The showbread, it mentions the shulchan in Sefer Shemot, and you put lechem apanim, but doesn't detail when you do it and how you do it. That's dafka in Sefer Vayikra, and we're going to come and read it now, and see the word brit there as well. Now, before we do, I'm sorry, as we do that, where are we? We need a chumash, so the chumash is going to be right here. I have it open to. Well, here we go. We don't want numbers. We want Vayikra. It's in chapter 24. It's right after the Chagim for some reason. And then I'll share with you my little analogy. In chapter 24, almost out of nowhere, after the Chagim, after the Moedim, we repeat the laws of the menorah, Shemen Zayit Zachatit Lamor Ladot Ner Tamid, on the menorah. And then we're told as follows, in Pasuk in chapter 24, verse 5. Take flour, or fine flour, solid, make 12 chalot, 2 esronim each one, put them on 2 different groups, 6 on each group on the pure shulchan, okay? And then you put lavona, frankincense on the bread as well. And then we say as follows. When do we change the bread? Every day we light the candles and bring K'toret and the korban tamid, as opposed to all the other avodot tamid, which are done every day. This one, b'yom HaShabbat, b'yom HaShabbat, yarchenu lifnei Hashem tamid. Every week, once a week on Shabbat, is when you change the bread from Bnei Yisrael, a Brit Olam. Now, the word Brit Olam is there only by the Lechem Apanim, because it's done every Shabbat. And remember, Shabbat, that we saw last week, is going to be our Od Brit. Remember, it's also, we know from davening again in Shabbat, that we talked about last week. I'll just share my screen one more time. What we showed you last week. This was this week. This was last week. Remember, we had after all the Mishkan in Parshat Kitisa, after we have all the seven chapters of the Mishkan, tell Bnei Yisrael, keep Shabbat. Ki oti benim beinechem ladat ki ani Hashem mekadoshchem. Remember, Shabbat is an old brit that God chose us at Har Sinai to serve Him. Keep Shabbat, and therefore, because it's our symbol of our commitment, if you desecrate the symbol of the covenant, you're cut off from the covenant, and it's a death penalty. And then the 4th commandment, which is why it's in the Luchot HaBrit, in the terms of the covenant. And then the famous V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbat, again, for a Brit Olam. It's an eternal covenant. It's an Od Brit La'olam, because God, just like God created in 7 days, but separated the 7th day to bring God to the 6 days of the week, God separates the Jewish people to bring God to the 70 nations. So it makes sense now that the concept of Brit Olam goes together with Lechem Papanim, which is switched every Shabbat on the Shulchan, as opposed to the other Avodah, which are daily, which fits very nicely to the theme of the manna, which prepared us for our Sinai, which we can see later today. Why dafka the bread, which is our replacing the manna, we're going to show that off every Shabbat. Okay, so that's my little background, and now I want to get to the main point of the share. That was just a little backup. I'm sorry, back to our source. Where are we? Today's source sheet is 16. Okay, so we had again the 2 times before this in Vayikra. is with the Brit Melach on the Korbanot and the Brit Olam relating to switching the Shulchan, the bread on the Shulchan every week. Now, everything else, notice, is in chapter 26, Vayikra 26. See all the phrases, we'll do it in detail in a minute. Hakimoti Briti, Lafrechemet Briti. But again, the last 8 are all in chapter 26 in the 2 sides of the Tochacha. Now, to appreciate what we're doing, all these phrases in the Tochacha, Hakimoti Briti Itchem, and the brit between God and the land, etc. I want to read, and remember, the brit is Lo L'chal Elohim, I'll be your God, you'll be my people. I want to go back to what we did last week when we traced the concept of Brit and Chumash. First, we had the Rainbow Covenant with all the same wording as the circumcision covenant. Let's take a look again at the 2 verses which are the center of what we call circumcision covenant. For circumcision is the oath Brit, the reminder that it's a Brit, it's an eternal Brit between God and his people. Listen to the phrases, Vakimoti et Briti beni ubenecha. Again, this is in Brit Milah. I'm purposely just doing the Hebrew because the phrases are what's important. Remember, we have the same thing in Vakimoti et Briti itchem. So I'll give a Brit between me and you, that I'll be your God, hence you'll be my people, for you and your children forever. Now listen carefully. Look at the words. V'natati, remember that word. V'natati lacha l'zarcha acharecha et eretz Canaan lachuzat olam. I'm giving you the land of Canaan for eternal inheritance, and there I'll be your God. And therefore, circumcise the skin of your circumcision, and that'll be a od brit between me and you. Remember the phrase benu benechem. Now, I want to share with you an analogy. Remember we saw last week that Chazal say, Rabbi Shmuel says in the Mechilta, that the Sefer Brit that we said Nasa v'nishma to, that we accepted at Har Sinai, might have been the Tochachot, the basically Parshat Bahar B'chukotai. That was our theme last week. I'll show it to you again in a minute. So forget all that for a minute. I want to give you a little analogy. Tell me if you buy it. It was just something I thought of this week. Let's say you have a wealthy friend who has an apartment in Jerusalem, okay? He owns real estate in Jerusalem. They call it a house better instead of an apartment. A really nice house in Baka, whatever it is, okay? He owns it. But he needs someone to watch it for him. And this house in Jerusalem is, has this company name on it. It's big. He needs someone to live in the house. So he says, you can stay in the house. It's all yours, but it belongs to me. How do you pay me rent? Right? Act in my house in a way that makes my company look good. And as long as you're doing that, you have a supply of food, the air conditioning work fine, the heating system, constant food coming in. If you misbehave in this house, right, you'll need a plumber. You'll be in trouble. And I may have to throw you, I might have to evict you at least for a while. Now, understand what I'm getting at? My goal is my company. Right? I have a home. I have real estate in Jerusalem. I have a beautiful house. You can live there for free, but how do you pay rent? Through your behavior. Now, when God chooses Avram and his offspring to have an eternal covenant to represent God as a people, God's saying, I own real estate in the land of Israel. The whole country belongs to me. Remember, Kili Kol Haaretz. And I'm giving it to you in order for you to fulfill the covenant. But it belongs to me. And on the condition you act properly in this house of mine, right, then that's how you pay your rent. But you better behave because, and you need to remember it belongs to me. And every 50 years, you need to renew that lease. To make sure you remember, because if you live it all the time, you might think it belongs to you. Which I want to claim is actually the first Rashi in Chumash. Remember why Chumash begins with Reshit. They tell us the land belongs to God, and he gives it to his upper worthy. Now, if you're going to sign that rental agreement with your friend who has that beautiful house in Jerusalem, right? Are you going to hear about these conditions before you sign the covenant or after you sign the rental? Ruth, what are you saying?
Before.
Now, if I'm going to sign the covenant and the covenant is based on where I'm living, right? So it makes sense before I enter the apartment or enter the house or begin my rental, I need to know what the conditions are. So I want to use that analogy to try to explain why Rabbi Shmuel in the Mechilta holds that the Sefer Brit that we read, that we say Nasa v'nishma to, precedes the covenant because it's a condition on which we receive the land. Now, why is that important? Because in the original covenant that God makes with Abraham Avinu to be a nation, it includes the land. But the land is a vehicle through which we achieve the goal of being a nation representing God. So if the very original covenant called Brit Milah, which is so central to Sefer Bereshit, is all about being a nation representing God. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. And for that reason, I'm setting aside the land of Israel as a vehicle to fulfill that goal. And you need to remember that. Now, to be eternal, you have to have children. Therefore, circumcision will be the reminder about having children and keeping the tradition going. But you also have to remember the land belongs to me. You can hold on to it. And therefore, in the detail of that covenant, when it becomes official, when we become a nation, it begins with the land. And therefore, we'll see every 7 years, the land needs to take a rest, just like every 7 days, you need to take a rest in the realm of time. Every 7 years, the land needs to take a rest. They all relate to the sun, the daily cycle of the sun and the yearly cycle of the sun. Um, and then every 50 years, you need to remember and renew your lease and remember who it belongs to. Now, what I want to claim is this ownership of the land by God sets up an infrastructure which has applications. I'll explain what I mean by infrastructure. Electricity is an infrastructure. Once I have that infrastructure, I can have a refrigerator, a stove, I can have appliances, I can have lights. But there's infrastructure, and then once I have an infrastructure, I can do things on top of it. The same thing, internet is the infrastructure, and then I can do apps and things like that. They can do Waze, and I can do, Facebook and whatever else I do on there. What I want to claim is the ownership of the land belonging to God, but renting it to us as a place where the covenant, I call that's your infrastructure. And that's going to shape our behavior, not just on the Yovel year and on the Shemitah year, every year of our lives. It's setting a society where you're always on the rental, basically. You never own the place, and remember who your boss is, and remember what you need to do, how you pay your rent. And there's no cash involved. And you shouldn't think that the way you pay God is by feeding him animals. You might need to thank him every once in a while. Send him you need to remind yourself that be thankful to the God who gave you this beautiful apartment to live in. But the way you pay your rent is by how you behave. And that's exactly the tochacha. Now, look again at the wording. Again, anyway, that's the main thing I want to share with you today. Was that analogy? Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's right or not, but just an analogy, because I thought of it on Shabbat because I have a friend who's looking to rent somewhere, and I have another friend who owns an apartment in Yerushalayim. I know they could take really good care of it. And I say, well, now it just dawned on me for an idea. And then I thought about what we learned last week. Now, what I want to show you is the word to give. Remember to give? Here, let's take a look again at, it's right here on the thing. Remember, Vakimotit Briti, I should have made this bigger. Benatati, where's that? Natati. Is that how we highlight it? It doesn't highlight it. I can't make it bigger, but you see the word? Benatati, I'm giving you and your offspring at Keres Kanan L'chozat Olam. We'll see these words coming later on. Now we'll take a look how Parsha Bahar begins. So let me stop. Oh, wait, I have this shit right here. Here. We did the rental contract. Let's go back to the Chizkuni we saw last week, where Chizkuni says, Moshe takes the Sefer Abrid at Har Sinai. We read this week in Parshat Mishpatim. Read it out loud, and the people said, Nasa v'nishma. Now remember, Rashi claims, what did he read? Sefer Breshit, which is perfect now. I don't think Rashi means he read all Breshit, including Yudan, Tamar, and Yosef and his brothers and everything. But the theme of covenant in Breshit, which is primarily Brit Milah, and it's about Brit Bein term of the historical, how we become a nation. Brit Milah setting aside the land for the nation. But the theme of Brit is in Breshit. But in Brit Milah and Breshit, we have the idea that God's giving us a land as a vehicle to fulfill the covenant. So Chizkuni quotes the Mechilta, says, take Sefer Brit. Chumash is not in chronological order. What is the Sefer Brit? To Tochachot, as Mechilta says, in Sefer Vayikra. Now, what's it say before the Torah begin? In the beginning of Parshat Bahar, it says, V'shabtar Shabbat Lashem, followed by the Brachot and Klolot. Okay? And when it's over, it says, Elachum Mishpatim, we saw last week in the Torah, which God gave Beinu Ubein. Remember, we saw the idea of covenant in that closing line. And then God tells us if you accept these conditions on you, okay, then you can have the land, etc. And when God saw that we accepted these conditions, we signed the covenant in blood, basically. We signed it, initialed it with our blood, right? And it says, now you're tied, now you're working for me. You're tied, but like in a marriage type sign. And then tomorrow come and get all the laws. That you accepted the basic covenant command, and therefore we said we'll do what we said, and we'll continue, and we'll listen to whatever you want to command us in the continuation. That's what we saw last week. Now, in light of that, I have a new understanding of a phrase in Brit Sinai which was always problematic. Remember? Remember the proposition before we get to Ten Commandments in chapter 19 in Shemot? That was a week ago. But time Shemot, remember God calls Moshe up the mountain, Go Tamar, go tell this to the people. Look what I did for you, and now what can you do for me? But Im Shemot Tishmu B'Koli, we obey me. That's basic. Ushmartem et Briti, that'll be the covenant of Har Sinai. That you'll be my special nation. Why? Ki li kol haaretz, I'm putting the dagesh on the li, okay? Because it's my land. In other words, in the proposition to be a nation of God, the land belongs to me, and if you follow my covenant, you can have this land to live there, and then there you'll be a nation representing me, a nation separated to serve me, and that's the conditions. So if the aretz, I always explain the aretz was that it means from Breshit Bar Tashmaim V'Taretz, because I own the whole land, the whole globe. You should, as a motivator, Rashi, this is a motivator why you should accept the brit, because I own the land. But it could be this relates to the land of Israel in the Aretz. One of my Rabbim used to say all the time. I used to disagree with him all the time. I thought he was too much of a Zionist because he was saying, Kilikos is only the land of Israel. He also, but now it could be that really is referring to the land of Israel. Okay, now, so in light of that, we're gonna discuss Parsha Bahar. I want to show you, as I explained, why it would make sense it's before Matan Torah. Then I want to prove to you why it can't be. It's nice, but I might be able to solve it. Now, but I'll try to read it as though it's given beforehand. But again, thematically, it relates. What the main point I want to make is thematically, Bahar B'Chukotai relates to Brit Milah, and I want to show you why. Because remember, God promises the covenant, built l'chalalim, to be your God. I'll be your God, you'll be my people, and I'm staying inside the land of Israel as a vehicle to fulfill the covenant. So when I tell Moshe at Har Sinai saying that Bnei Israel is following, when you come to the land, where's my marker? What happened to I can't find my mouse. Here's my mouse, and here's my highlighter. Okay. Hey, when you come to the land, you see my highlighter there? Wait, we see it. When you come to the land which Asher Ani Noten Lechem, see the word Noten? That's, remember V'natati at the Aretz, we have God's giving you the land in the context of Brit Milah, right? And then the land needs to rest as Shabbat Lashem. Though Shabbat is Yod Brit, Shabbat, and the land now will be this reminder of the covenant as well. Then, just like we'll take this back to the man very soon, but remember, work 6 years, and the seventh year, you work 6 years, and the seventh year the land needs to rest. Just like you have to work 6 days a week, and 7th day you rest. Now the land chosen has to rest 6 years and rest on the seventh year. Has to work 6 years and works on the seventh. Okay, and therefore you can't plant it those 7 years. Now, for you and for all the people, they're supposed to eat the produce of the land, but it's equal for everybody. Everyone's equal. The land of equality, without getting into all the details. Now, then you count 7 weeks, 7 cycles of 7. Okay. Again, it relates back to the manna and the theme of Shabbat. And then we have 49 years. And now I have a problem. Why? Because in the 50th year, we blow shofar Torah on the 7th month, which sounds like Har Sinai, doesn't it? On the 10th of the month, on Yom Kippur, you blow the shofar. Now the question, can we talk about Yom Kippur before Chet HaEgel? Can we talk about Yom Kippur? Does the date make sense before the story of Chet HaEgel? The way we always understand it, Yom Kippurim, on the 7th month, the 10th day of the 7th month, is the day we get the second Luchot. It's not explicit, but it's almost implicit when you read the story. Yom Kippur, why have a holiday on the 10th day of a month? Now, it could be that maybe that day was special from the very beginning, just like the 10th of Nisan was special before leaving Egypt. And that's the first month. Maybe 6 months later, it could be Yom Kippur was a special day Not just it just so happened we got the second Luchot on that day. There's a possibility Yom Kippur might have been set aside from the very beginning. Either way, but if I follow what most Parshim do, is that the date of Yom Kippur is because of Chet Egel, then this ruins it because I picked the day. Now it could be that it needs to be once a year, like we see in Parshat Tetzaveh on Mizbach Torah. Once a year you need kapara. It goes back to whether kapara is because of Chet Egel or not. It goes back to the whole theme about the Mishkan, whether it's the Chatchil or B'diavad. Um, or it could be this is just and when Chumash is finished, we put like almost like a footnote here. Oh, this we do dafka on the 10th day, like we said by Yom Kippur. Once a year we need to do kapara on the Mishkan, on the Mikdash, and we decide to do it on Yom Kippurim. Okay. So it's just the pasuk is the problem. The rest of the things are fine. Then set aside the 50th year. Remember, we have to pick someday. We have to increment it. So that's a good day to pick it. And then you give Dror L'chot Shvel, and then everyone goes back. Ish al achuzato. Remember, achuzato olam by Brit Milah. Each one goes back to his thing. And then that's the 8th year. And then everyone goes back. Tzibur achuzah coming back. Achuzah, like it says, achuzat olam as opposed to Yerusha. Because you don't own it, you're holding on to it, but there's an owner above it. Now, essentially, this has the infrastructure, and because of that, remember that don't use this law to cheat people, and therefore, because this is going to affect how real estate deals are done all 50 years or 49 years. When you're selling real estate, you're never really selling land, you're simply giving the right to rent. You have basically up to a 49-year lease. Which, by the way, in Israel is the same law today. When you, from the government, like my contract for my house, wherever, is a 49-year lease, which is a really cool law to have in Israel. I'm pretty sure that's the reason why also. Okay, so when you send something, what do you call it? When you sell something, don't cheat another person. I know Yavo's coming, he doesn't, but you're not selling land, you're selling years of you're years of produce, not the land itself. Okay, so that was the thing. And then we give the final thing again. Don't cheat your fellow man. Fear your God. Why? That's the theme of Brit Sinai again, the covenant. Then, now in details, keep all my chukim mishpatim tishmuru. That's the rest of that began detailed in chapter 18. When we saw the second half of Vayikra begins with chukim mishpatim. They're detailed later in Sefer Devarim. We also have in Parshat Mishpatim. Okay, and you sit in the line, and then. If you do that, if you keep Machum Shpatim, that's your rental payment, then I'll protect the house, you'll have what to eat. It'll be food, and it'll be peace and quiet, everything will be fine, and I'll bless the land. And then here's a great line. The land can never be sold forever. Why? Kili haaretz. Remember? That's the phrase from Har Sinai. Kili kol haaretz. Remember what you saw before in Brit Sinai in chapter 19 in the proposition? And kigerim v'toshavim etim imadi. Now, where do we have that in Sefer Bereshit? Avram Avinu, but he wants to buy Marta Machpelah for Nechuzat Kaver. What's he tell Bnei Chet? I'm a Gervet Toshav Anochi Machem. I want a Nechuzat Kaver. A Gervet Toshav can have an Achuzah, but he doesn't own it. He can only have an Achuzah. But we're Gerim B'Toshavim, and we need to know that, which is the first Rashi in Chumash, why we begin with Bereshit. Okay. Now, and because of that, because everyone needs land to make a living on, then we have the application of this, not only in the over Shemitah year, this affects real estate and business all 49 years. And therefore, if a member of your community, if one of your brethren, becomes poor and has to mortgage his property like a monopoly, you have to buy back the mortgage for him. The Goel comes. Now, notice the idea of Goel, just like God redeemed us from Egypt and gave us this land. If a member of our community loses his land, his ownership of land, it's our obligation to be a goel, to redeem him. Okay? And therefore, see the word gula comes all through this whole section. But I'm not going to do all the details here. That's why I have it small now. Then basically, have a lot of laws, I call it applications of these laws, not only in the Shemitah or Yova year, but all 49 years, about how we have to make sure that people own land. And then it continues, and if he sells his property not to a fellow Jew, but to a non-Jew, to a Gervet Toshav, etc., and you have to lend him money, make sure to, not to take interest. Notice how that fits very nicely to laws of interest that we had in Parshat Mishpatim this week. But I want to show you soon that a lot of laws of Parshat Mishpatim relate to this as well. And therefore, not taking interest, lend money so he can buy back his freedom, and don't take interest so he can pay you back slowly. Okay. And then how do we conclude this whole section that a person has to own his land, right? And if he has to sell his property or mortgage his property to another Jew or to a non-Jew, it's our duty to lend him money to buy it back. So to make sure everyone owns land and can make his own living, we have a final reminder: Ani Hashem Elokechem, which is Brit Sinai, who took you out of Egypt. L'natan lechem Eretz Canaan, Brit Milah, remember word for word. Liot lachal Elohim. So this is the opening line of the Ten Commandments. We took you out of Egypt, which goes back to Brit Milah and Brit Ben B'tarim. But Eretz Canaan, Liot lachal Elohim, is exactly the wording of Brit Milah. So again, don't say the Brit Milah Psukim. So when Rashi says Sefer Brit is Sefer Breshit, and Mechilta says it's Bar B'chukotai, they're onto something big. That's all. Now, it could be that the very concept is at Har Sinai, and it's detailed later in Vayikra. That's fine, because there's no reason why these laws wouldn't be given in the first 40 days, maybe even on the first day of Har Sinai. In other words, it comes before Chet HaEgel. That's my point. Except for that pasuk about Yom Kippurim, which we have to deal with separately. It can be a footnote, or it could be maybe Yom Kippur was the day that was set aside even beforehand. Now we have the flip side. Not if you have to sell your land, if you have to sell yourself. It's just like if you have to sell your land, we have to do our most to be the goel to make sure he gets his land back. If you sell yourself into slavery, you're so poor, it's our job to buy him back, to buy his freedom back. So again, no one can be in slavery forever because by Yovel everyone goes free. But there's a whole machloket how this deals with the Eved Ivri, 7-year cycle of Eved Ivri. That's the Parshim. I'll deal with that. But the main thing is, should you have a Jewish slave who sold himself because of a debt, what can't you do? Right? Don't treat him like a slave. Don't treat him like an Eved. Okay? Basically, you own his work output. Now notice, when you have land, basically, the land belongs to God or the owner, but you're getting the produce of the year. When you have a worker, you don't own the person, you own his work output. If you see the analogy? Because you can't own another person, and that's we have all these lots of mishpatim with an Eved. Okay. Okay, Beni goes back home. Why? And then we have what's beautiful summary pasuk. Ki avadayim, these are my servants. Remember, we're avadim, we're employees, not consumers, and that's why I took you out of Egypt. And therefore, we don't treat fellow Jew as a slave only his work output. Therefore, don't do avodat parach like what Egypt did to us, and have yirat Hashem. But who can you own forever? I guess is the someone who's not part of our community, someone who's an outside person. Then they have different laws, because they're not part of our community. So then you can you have to treat them properly, but the laws of freeing that slave don't apply to like they do to a fellow Jew. Okay, but from your brethren of Israel, no avodat parach. And let's say someone has to sell himself to a non-Jew. Again, you have to go back and be the goel. And then we have the final summary. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim. Again, we're servants for me, and that's why I took you out of Egypt. Ani Hashem Elokechem. So we have the theme of Brit Milah, Brit Ben B'tarim. Relating to the land and the tashti, the infrastructure, are the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, but the applications every year in our lives that deal with our community, that our land ownership and our work ethics, that once we have these laws of Shemitah and Yovel set up, it's going to affect our behavior all in every day of our life. Now, then how do we end? We have this line which takes us back to, again, Brit Sinai. We have the second commandment about other gods, and then we make sure to keep Shabbat and Mikdash. Shabbat, the reminder of Har Sinai in the realm of time, Mikdash in the realm of space, again, Ani Hashem. And then I go say how to pay our rent. If you follow my laws, got it? Then I'll give you water and food. The land will give its fruit. Like we say basically every day in Shema. If you follow my laws, the land will give its fruit because you're working for me. Okay? And therefore we have Pru again, the same phrases of Brit Milah. And then you can have my Mishkan, right? My model house can be among you. It won't be sick of you, etc. I'll walk among you like we had by Brit Milah, Italech lefanei v'yatamim, and I'll be your God, you'll be my people. That's the big theme of, and that's why God took us out of Egypt. I took you out of slavery so you can work for me. Okay. If you don't listen, and everything will be 7 times 7. Remember all the sevens in the curses without reading all the details. And then you can't represent me, and therefore I have to destroy the mikdash that represents me. I won't listen to your korbanot because they'd smell bad now because they have to reflect your behavior. And then I'll destroy the land, and I'll scatter you among the nations. Got it? Your land will be left desolate. And then the land will basically, this thing comes up in Yirmiyahu later on, that when we go into exile, the land finally rests its Shemitah years. It's when we weren't keeping Shemitah properly. Again, you keep Shemitah not only in the Shemitah year, you keep Shemitah in the 6 years that it's not Shemitah. Because the theme of Shemitah applies itself during all the years, and then the land will get its rest for all the time you left it. Okay? And then hopefully your punishment will cause you to do tshuva. You'll do proper tshuva. And notice, Azikana levavam harel azir satavunam. Isn't that nice how Chumash uses a circumcised heart? You have to circumcise your heart because you didn't feel the Brit Milah, because you didn't feel the theme of circumcision. I think that's intentional, but I'm not sure, but it's a nice analogy. And then God says, the Brit, it's an eternal Brit. Remember, it's the Brit Melech, and therefore I'll remember my Brit. One day I'll bring you back. Okay? I'll remember the land. The Brit I promised Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I'll remember the land, and therefore the land won't be lost forever. Why? Because Ani Hashem Elokechem. I remember the Brit I made with you when I took you out of Egypt. Ani Hashem. And then we have the final line, which was covenantal, that we have to keep, which is Beino, which was on the contract between God and his people in the Har Sinai, Biad Moshe. Again, that was the anchor that led Rabbi Shmuel to say that this was part of the Nasa Benishma. Okay. I told you, notice only the word Shemitah isn't mentioned here. Now, I want to show you something in Parshat Mishpatim now that relates to this, which I did doing this now because we had Parshat Mishpatim this week. I'll go back to these psukim. I want to show you in a different source sheet, Parshat Mishpatim. I think it's here. Yeah. And Parshat Mishpatim, without doing the whole shir in Parshat Mishpatim, is 3 chapters of laws that follow the 10 Commandments. But they're part of the Brit. According to, if I keep Chumash in order, we say Nasa v'Nishma to the laws in Parshat Mishpatim. Remember, because we have, Chazal put it out of order, make it earlier, but if I keep Chumash in order, follow the Ramban, then when we say Nasa v'Nishma, it's not just the 10 Commandments, it's all the laws in Parshat Mishpatim, the 3 chapters that follow. Now, what happened in a nutshell in Parshat Mishpatim? God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, look, I spoke to you from heaven, therefore don't make golden images out of me. Instead, serve me with the Mizbeach. And it's like any religion. There's an altar, but keep it simple. Keep a simple Mizbeach. One law about how to serve God, how you should serve God. And then the main way you serve God are the laws between man and his fellow man. These are the Mishpatim, the laws of Ebed Ivri, the laws of Nezikin, all the laws of damages, a court system, everything we read this week. Then we have those are all case laws that go to the court system, damages and shomrim, remember, and responsibility basically for any damage you cause to another person, maliciously or unintentionally, whatever it might be. And then don't serve other gods again, only God. And then we flip to the ethical laws that aren't punished by Beit Din, but we have to follow because God's watching, not to cheat. Again, don't ona'ah, like we saw by Shemitah. Again, don't cheat a stranger, you of all people, because you were strangers in Egypt. Being nice to the orphan and the widow, etc. The crowd to me not heard their cry. Then you have to lend money. Remember in Kesef Tavet Ami, don't take neshek, don't take interest, etc., which relates to what we saw before as well. And if you take a collateral, make sure to give it back to them if something you need for sleeping. And then returning lost items, even for people you don't like. Midvar Sheker Terchach, all these different things. Basically, we have 3 chapters of laws between man and his fellow men, of a just society, and an ethical one. And look how we end. Listen to the ending, how we're going to end this thing and how it relates to the land. Okay? The last line is, don't oppress a stranger, begelo tochatz. And you know what it feels like to be a stranger, but because you were strangers in Egypt. And before we close it up, we're going to go back to 2 mitzvot now, Shabbat and Shemitah. Remember? Just like we had before, just like we have there, just like we have in Vayikra. So work your land for 6 years, and gather its produce. And the seventh year, now we finally have the word Shemitah. Basically, let go and just leave it settle and let the poor people eat. And whatever you don't eat, let the animals eat. Basically you can't hoard that year. And then after we have laws of Shemitah, which are, again, it's a law between God and man, but its application is for the poor people to have what to eat. Again, it's not only that year, but the remembering what it feels like to live it a day at a time on your food will make you more kind during the 6 years that you're working your field. That's the idea behind it. And then work 6 days a week, and the seventh day you have to rest. And your rest on the seventh day will affect how you behave on the 6 days when you're working. So your workers have a day of rest, also the social element to keeping Shabbat. So other people have a day of rest as well. Now watch what happens. The last law will be Sholosh Regalim. Remember the 3 pilgrimage holidays. But what do we do? It doesn't say what to do. It says, on these 3 times a year, I want to see you in my office. I want to be seen me. But when? During the Aviv in the spring, remember when the grain harvest begins, in the Katsir when your grain harvest comes to an end, and Chag HaSif when your fruit harvest ends. The 3 critical times of the agricultural year. Those 3 times a year, come and see me. But look at the transition verse. Okay? Let me make this a lot bigger now. Maybe I should do this in a big chumash. Everything I just told you, listen to, and don't you dare mention the names of other gods. Instead, serve me 3 times a year. Now, let me stop this share for a minute. Of all laws, why is this the main law that ends this whole unit? So if this brit, remember Parshat Mishpatim is this brit, and we have Shabbat and Shemitah, etc. But what are we saying? Don't mention the names of other gods. Who are these other gods? We should mention their names. We're about to go to the land of Canaan. Those gods are the gods of Canaan. That's Baal and Asherah, the rain god, the fertility god, the sun god, all the different agricultural gods. The Chumash tells us this is really one God, and that's the story of 7 days of creation. Therefore, the number 7 fits beautifully. Why did the Canaanites go to the rain god, serve Baal, to get rain? Why did they serve Asherah? To have their produce grow. God's saying, come to me instead, to remember I'm in charge, but I'm in charge based on what? If you keep the laws of Parshat Mishpatim. So if you want food in your house, if you keep, let me show it in a regular Chumash, so it's clear. Leviticus, we don't want Leviticus, oh, that's not good. We want Shemot. Shemot chapter 23. We just read it. It's fresh in your memories from this week. We did it in Chumash. Okay, here we have right here. We had all these laws. Remember, we had treating the summary, how to treat the stranger, etc. And you of all people, because you were strangers in Egypt. The laws of Shemitah, 6 years work, 7 years Shemitah. Shabbat, 6 days work, 7th day Shabbat. Again, all the otot of the Brit. Again, for social reasons. And then everything I just told you, a summary. Everything I just told you above, keep them. And don't you dare mention the names of other gods who don't exist anyhow, and they're not going to help you. Instead, come to me on the 3 times of year when you would have gone to those gods. When? In the Aviv, in the Katsir, remember, in Shavuot, and Chag HaSif. And those 3 times a year, come to see me. Now, where do we see God? In Mikdash. What do we do? That's Sefer Vayikra. That's a detail how we do it. But thematically, that's the idea behind it. Because if you're renting God's land, and you want that land to be blessed, if you want food in your land, you have to remember how you have to behave to be worthy of the land. And what's the big, basically, the revolutionary idea in Parshat Mishpatim, that of course we need God for what everyone needs God's for their prosperity and for their food and for their livelihood. But how do you get God on this one God who's in charge of everything? Keep the laws of Parshat Mishpatim. Everything I just told you, keep. That just society, the whole 2 sections of it, the judicial system and the ethical system, remember Mishpat and Tzedakah, and then come to me, not to pray for rain, pray to me, remember what you need to do to be worthy of rain, because that's in your rental contract. And then guess what the next thing God will tell them? I'm sending a malach to help you conquer the land of Israel. You better listen to him, okay, because he won't forgive you. Now listen, pretend that Moshe said this. Remember, I'm bringing you to this land I just promised you. Let's say Moshe read aloud in Sefer Brit, Ki im shamoa tishma b'kolo v'asita kol asher daber. If you listen to what this malach says in my name, and hence do what I'm saying to do, then your enemies will be my enemies and your adversaries will be mine. And then my malach will lead the way and help you conquer the land that I'm promising you. Now, if someone read out loud, Im shema tishma b'kolo v'asita kol asher daber, how would you officially answer that condition? Naseh v'asita shema v'nishma. You see how that might fit to Naseh v'nishma? Now, where do we have that? That's exactly the next chapter. That's chapter 24. When we have now the covenant, again, whether it was before or after, but Naseh v'nishma, like Moshe writes down the words of God, Divrei Hashem in the Mishpatim, he tells them that. But he only writes down the Divrei Hashem, which are things that aren't Mishpatim, which are that recent promise. And then he reads out loud. He writes it down, which is probably the Sefer Brit. And he reads it out loud, and the people answer, Naseh v'nishma. If it's a big ceremony, you can't read something too long. So I think basically, during the 3 days of preparation before Sinai, they studied Sefer Breshit. And they got Sefer Breshit. They received the details of the contract, Parsha Bahar B'chukotai, and then they made the official ceremony, either right before getting the Torah or right after getting the Torah. But whatever it is, Bahar B'chukotai, if it's not right before the Ten Commandments, it's right after. Which explains why Chumash goes out of its way to tell you these laws were given in Bahar Sinai. And on top of that, it explains why they end Sefer Vayikra, which is closing up the whole idea of, from covenant at Sinai to sanctuary, to remember the covenant, and when you go to visit God, and then in the land, how that affects how you act in the land, and how, again, this infrastructure of loss of Shemitah and Yovel, etc., are going to set the stage for how you live, how you apply that in every day of your life, every week of your life, every day of your life, and your holidays, etc. Then Moshe goes up afterwards for 40 days to get the more detailed laws and maybe the laws of the Mishkan. Okay, so that was the first part of this year, which this year's already over. So again, I don't have time for the end. But just briefly, where are we? Let me check stop the share for a minute. Stop the share and go back to my source sheet. No questions in the chat. Okay, either no one understood or it was clear. Not sure which of the two. Okay. What I wanted to do now is go back to my source sheet here. So
Rabbi,
yeah, go ahead.
I have a question, and I may be totally wrong. Isn't it true that Abraham circumcised Ishmael too, or am I
No,
totally
that's what Chumash says.
So if 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 sorry if if Mila is supposed to be the offspring for getting the land, then why does
Yishmael, okay. That's a famous question. Brit Milad, there's no doubt that Brit Yekim Yitzchak is right afterwards. So why does Avram have to? Why is Yishmael being circumcised? Because God tells Avram, every member of your household has to be circumcised. It's a din in the household of Avram Avinu. And later I learned from there, every member of your household needs circumcision. So if you have workers, right, you have to circumcise them. You basically have to convert them or free them, one or the other. Or they can work, they can have a sachir, you can be a sachir, but you can't be an eved unless you become an eved Kanani and become circumcised. But that's halachic discussion. But that's a big question when you study chapter 17 in Breshit. Why is Chumash out of its way to tell you, and why is God tell Avram Avinu that every member of your household needs to be circumcised? Remember, called Eved in your house, and that includes Ishmael as well. But basically, everyone living in Avram's home and household, he doesn't say that Ishmael has to continue circumcision afterwards. Islam accepted that later on. That's their reason for it. But God didn't tell Avram to tell Yishmael that he has to circumcise his children. He says the opposite. He tells Avram, Yitzchak has to, that Briti Akim et Yitzchak, my Brit will be with Yitzchak. But Avram circumcising all the members of his household, that's a din in the household of Avram Avinu with Brit Milah, not a din in their offspring. The idea of Brit Milah going to the offspring would be through Yitzchak. Now, I think we did this quickly we did it last year for sure, but the idea of the cycles of 7 and Shabbat, we learned from the manna. So this for sure is before we got to Torah at Har Sinai. And then remember we get to Midbar Sin and we run out of food, and the people complain, and God tells Moshe, I'm going to mamtir lechem mina shamayim, and the people come and collect every day to teach them, will I follow my Torah or not? So in the land of Israel, we have lechem mina aretz, which is a katzir, which we have to rest every 7 years from working. But the whole theme of having bread, a daily supply of bread, of food, and then taking double on Friday, take as much as you need during the week, double on Friday because they don't have on Shabbat. The idea of like we call that wealth management, and living a life of taking what you need, but storing as much as you need as well, and finding the balance what you need to store and manage for yourself as well, how much you have to share with others. That was the whole thing we saw in the manna. So it's interesting that the preparation for Har Sinai was the manna experience, was how we learned about Shabbat with the 6 days of collecting manna and the 7th day not having, and that's setting a cycle. And then the whole theme of Omer again. We'll go back to this, I guess. Now with this in mind, we'll go back now to the two chapters before Parshat Bahar are the Moedim and Amor, and the special laws in chapter 24 about Shabbat and the Avodat Tamid of the Shulchan and the Menorah. So in light of that, it makes sense how we'll see the laws of Omer in chapter 23. The laws are basically of the 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuot, or from Chag HaMatzot to Shavuot, will fit perfectly to this theme. But I guess that'll be the shir in 2 weeks. What I wanted to do, next week there'll be a shir for Yom Yom Purim. And then the 2 weeks before Pesach, by 2 or 3 weeks before Pesach, I was saving the Moedim to do them before Pesach. I want to do Moedei Hashem and counting the Omer, etc. I figured it's safe that because by Pesach I have to finish Sefer Vayikra. So that's what I was planning to do. I know there'll be special Pesach shiurim a week or two beforehand. So I was saving Parshat Emor, chapters 23 and 24 before Passover. So we'll go back to this and how it relates to the manna then. But it'll fit beautifully. Just to mention, the pattern of counting seven weeks from Pesach to Shavuot and turning out to be 50 days is very parallel to the 7-year cycle of Shemitah and Yovel. So there's got to be a common theme between them, and they'll all take us right to Hakel in the Yovel year. Remember, in the Shofar Yovel will be the Shofar of Har Sinai. It all fit very nicely together by the time we finish with it. So that was our again. So I'm skipping the Omer part, and we did the rest was that was the end of. We'll save that for next week. But today again, the main thing I want to show you today. The main thing I want to get across was that analogy of the land setting up an infrastructure for our relationship with God, but the covenantal nature, it's the reason Vayikra talks about covenant, is closing the theme of covenant from Sefer Shemot, and it's going to focus on the land being a vehicle through which we fulfill the covenant, and therefore the land has special laws, just like the people have special laws because they're representing God. So the guest house we're living in, the land of Israel, has special laws. And God says, act properly in my guest house, everything will be great. Do a bad job, and I'll find another, either the house will remain empty, or I might let someone else live in it if you're really, really bad. But you can't stay there forever. No, how to throw them out, that's a different question. No, once it's time to move back in, what do? Can you share the house with somebody else? With someone else living there? That takes us to political problems. Already, any quick questions on the thing? Again, the main goal of the share today was just the analogy I wanted to get across, and why it makes so much sense why there's such a deep connection between Har Sinai and the covenant of Har Sinai, the theme of Brit, and the land of Israel. And when Rashi asked, what's the connection between Har Sinai and Shemitah? If Har Sinai is the Brit, I think if you study Brit Milah and Bereshit, I think the connection is obvious. Already. So have a good week, everybody. Again, next week there's a Yom Yun. And then after that, we're going to focus on. I still have to go to the Chukim, which I owe you from Kedoshim to you, but we're going to connect all that to the holidays. I need at least 2 classes on Parshat Emor in the holidays because all the holidays are Chukat Olam B'Chomesh V'Techem V'Dorotechem. So that'll be my anchor to explain what a chok is. And later we can go back to Kedoshim to you and see how the chukim there as well. Okay, have a good week. And remember, on behalf of Jay, there's a whole list of classes this week. I guess Benny's coming up soon, and just look at the emails and you'll find everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I've got to close the recording. 1 second, close the share. That and no, stop recording. Okay.